Good morning everybody, I'm back for day 2 of making my 18th century stays. The last bit of footage you would have seen is I was trying on mock-up version kind of 2.5-ish. Yeah, so I was on my second mock-up and I was at the point where I was just kind of tweaking a few panels here and there on it, and I was really happy with the fit as it was when I tried it on. It still doesn't have any boning or anything in it yet, but I'm happy enough with the panels that I think I'm going to go into the fabric now. So I am going to basically take apart my mock-up and I'm going to reuse the fabric from the side panels as basically the lining for the silk, and then there'll be another layer inside that which I'll show you in a second. So yes, I need to take that apart so I can take these panels out. I need to recut the back and the front panels in the calico, because as you can see they are kind of still at the mock-up point where there's kind of tucks and things in them, and this one is, the front panel is got the excess pinned out of it at the moment. So again, this need to retransfer that onto the pattern piece and just recut that panel, so it's obviously it's going to be on the fold, so you want a nice smooth front on there. And then I need to cut out my other fabric layers. So the outer, what we call the fashion layer fabric, is going to be this dark blue silk dupion. I originally wanted to do black, and as I said earlier on, I haven't got any black silk in and not really got an appropriate black fabric that I want to use for this. I like the idea of, as well as this being stays kind of my 18th century dress, I want to be able to potentially wear the stays as a, you know, like an evening bodice in their own right, for, you know, sort of fantasy events or still kind of steampunk balls or, you know, anything like that. So yeah, so I wanted to have a nice fabric on the outside, which is why I wanted to go for silk, and I have plenty of silk in my stash, including this dark blue, which will work very nicely. And then on the inside, the lining is going to be this kind of heavy canvas. I think it's a cotton. It's a very old fabric. I've had it a long time. And even then I bought it from somebody else, so yeah, it's it's high time it was used, and I've got tons of this, so you can see how much I've got there. I definitely don't need that much to make myself a pair of stays, but yeah, I should use some pieces from that. Off. Oh, I just realised I haven't put my pumpkin lights on. That's better. I forgot it was Halloween. Yes, I know, we're technically still in August, but I don't care. It's almost September, and it's slightly more acceptable to feel autumnal in September, I think. calico interlining, and then we've got the cotton canvas lining. So I need to line all those up. Excuse me. And then I'm going to need to start applying the boning channels in, so it keeps it nice and flat. So yeah, so I need to do that on all of the panels. Thank goodness this is only a 7-panel set of stays. So I luckily just remembered before I got any further that when I did the last toile, the mock-up with the side panels on it, on one side I tried 2 different grain lines on them just to see which was working better, and I forgot about it until I was cutting out just now, and suddenly remembered, oh yes, I need to do a new set of side panels on the opposite side, because I reused I took the mock-up apart and I was reusing the panels I already cut out as the interlining in the side panels, but that would mean the grain line would have been off on one side compared to the other fabrics in the layer, and it might just behave a little bit weird. So I'm just recutting the calico layer for the left side, I think it is. Yeah, because I don't want to get have started putting it together and putting the boning channels in and then discover the grain lines are all off and it all sits and pulls weird and wonky, because that would be really annoying. So the first panel that I've put together is the centre back panels, as you can see. So with all the panels, they are going to be flat lined rather than bag lined, so there's no internal lining. So it means I treat all the layers of the panels as one, except on this back panel, just to start off with, I have sewn the canvasy printed lining layer right sides together to the silk and calico layer, and then folded it back just so it gives that nice neat finish down that centre back edge seam. Obviously this is the seam where the eyelet will be for the lacing. So what I've done is I've just pressed it, and just ever so slightly, as you'll see, I've just rolled it just slightly over, so it just gives that, you don't really see, or you shouldn't really see the lining layer kind of showing along that edge. You should just see the silk layer. I mean, what I probably will do is, depending on how much of a lacing gap there ends up being, it shouldn't be too much of a lacing gap, but if it, for any reason, it does end up being a larger lacing gap than I'm expecting, then I can put in a modesty panel just to make it a little bit more splatter and a smoother finish. But if the panels are more or less kind of together, you're not really going to see any of that lining edge showing under there. But now I will continue to treat this as a flat line panel. Right, so I have started to put the back panel together. So you can see I've now got the boning channels down either side of where the eyelets are going to be, and if we have a look on the back, you may just be able to see, yes, you should be able to see that. You can see I've started marking in the boning channels for the rest of the boning. I've done this in chalk and using a straight ruler, and this is on the lining on the inside, so I'm not too worried about the chalk showing on the top of the fabric, and it will eventually wear off over time, so I'm not too worried about that. But yeah, so that's the two back panels. I'm now going to work my way through the other panels, and then we get to do all the stitching of them. I'm using this 10mm synthetic whalebone, which I bought from Vivienne Design. They sell a lot of corsetry supplies. I've never used it before. I normally use spiral steel boning in corsetry, but obviously 18th century garments would have originally had whalebone. We don't use whalebone anymore, but this synthetic plastic whalebone should do the trick. So I'm excited to give it a go, so I've never used it before. But yeah, this is 10mm boning. So I'm measuring my boning channels at 10mm, but by the time I put the chalk line on, that makes the channels just a smidge over the 10mm, and that'll be fine. That just gives a little bit of wiggle room to get the bones down the channel. Okay, so we have a load of chalk lines all over my pattern pieces now, and I'm now going to go and attempt to sew these. So yeah, wish me luck, because I've definitely yeah, there's a couple of mistake lines on here, so we shall see if I can remember to make sense of them when I get back to the sewing machine. This is probably going to take a while, so yeah, I'm going to find something to watch while I sew these, and I shall see you when they're done.
Dear and loyal subject, the ever unctuous Lord High Chamberlain. 7. He's approving.
We'll try that again. I've just tried filming a little bit on my phone, and my camera is connected via Bluetooth to my phone, so I can monitor what I'm actually seeing on screen, because my camera doesn't have a flip over screen. So yeah, I like to be able to see kind of what I'm doing and making sure everything's in shot. So if this is not in shot, I apologise. But yeah, for whatever reason, my phone is being really laggy, and when I've just checked the recording back, that's really laggy as well. So I can't record using my phone. So I'm recording, hoping this is in shot. So if it's not, I apologise. But we have made progress. We have boning channels. I'm hoping you'll see that. Also, I appreciate that they're dark channels sewn onto dark fabric. But if I flip it around and you can see the lining side, hopefully that will show for you as well. And that is all of the channels done. It didn't take as long as I thought it would, actually, although I'm hoping that's not because I've made any mistakes. There was some unpicking that had to be done, but it's not gone too bad, to be honest. It just needs a little bit of tidying up. And on to the next stage. So the next stage is I need to put these horizontal bones in, because once the overlocking is edged, once the overlocking has sealed the edge, I won't be able to get the bones in there. So yes, so I need to do that before I can do anything else. Scissors. Oh wow, that was really easy. I wasn't expecting it to be that easy. Do you like boning that you can cut with scissors? Oh yeah. So I have just rounded those ends off. I have heard you can use like a nail file to round these off as well, but you know, just a couple of little snips with the scissor, and you can see I've just rounded that edge off. So I'm hoping that's focused for you so you can see that. Right, let's feed these pieces in. So I'm putting the boning in between the lining side and the calico interlining, because obviously they're a lot stronger than the silk layer, and I don't want the boning like wiggling its way through. I don't know about you, but I can see myself never going back to spiral steel boning ever again. It's just a shame this is plastic really, but hey ho. Right, there's just a couple more horizontal boning channels, just little teeny tiny ones on the centre back panel there. And as you can see, I made them like I stitched down that edge, so I'm going to have to now unpick that just to get the boning in there. Whoops. Probably just seen some footage of me doing a fit in the final 3 layers of fabric, just but without any finishing up, obviously anything on the edges, just to see if I do need to do any more minor tweaks on it, and as you can see I was very, very happy with the fit, and I'd also finally cut the tabs in at the bottom as well, just so I could see that they were all sitting in the right place, and just make any little minor adjustments to the depth of the waist point on those. So today's job is to put the binding on. Now I'm no stranger to sewing binding on corsets, but all the videos and kind of information that I've looked up and watched on binding 18th century stays, it is that they are an absolute pig. So yeah, we'll see how I get on. I'm going to start with the easy bit, which is around the top edge. Here are the stays. Yes, I'm going to start by binding around the top edge because that's going to be fairly straightforward, and be more or less like when I bind a corset. The awkward bit I know is going to be the bottom and binding around all these. I'm going to give it a go at sewing it on by machine. I know it can be done with a bit of patience and kind of a bit of nimble machine witchery, so I'm going to give it a go, certainly from the reverse side, and when I get round to stitching it down on the front side, if it ends up looking a bit of a mess, then I will, before I get too far, I'll make the decision to stitch it by hand on the front, but we'll see how I get on. Yeah, will be a test of my sewing skills and dexterity. So for the binding, I happen to have this rather lovely and rather large amount of blue silk Dupion bias that I've already made up for a previous project, and this is obviously what is left over, and this will just be perfect because A, it saves me having to make a whole load of new bias binding. It's also in a very beautiful blue colour, which is going to offset beautifully against the really dark navy blue for the stays, and as you may have noticed, the ribbon I'm going to be using for the ties down the back and for the ties on the straps is going to be in this beautiful royal blue satin ribbon. So yeah, so I think that's going to look really, really, really striking, really, really lovely. The other thing is, if I run out of this, because I don't think there's going to be quite enough there to do all around the tabs around the bottom, because I think that's going to take a lot more length of bias than I think, but I do actually still have some of this silk just in my stash, so I can make up some more bias binding if I need to. So yes, so that's today's plan. Wish me luck. Let's see how I get on. So when I'm sewing bias binding onto corsets, and I'm going to use the same technique for these stays, I always start on the inside of the corset, so that when I sew the other side and I'm stitching down on the very edge of the bias binding, it will give me the most neatest finish. Or if necessary, I can whip stitch it down by hand for an even neater finish. But yeah, I always start with the bias binding on the inside of the corset or stays. I leave about 2 centimeters overlap there, and I'll show you when I come to do the other side how I fold this in to neaten up that edge. I don't really pin in place. I tend to just maneuver it around as I go. I will sometimes put a pin in just to start it, or to anchor it at the start if it's moving about a bit, but this isn't particularly slippery, and I'm sewing onto a cotton base, so I don't think it's going to go too far. But yeah, I just guide it around by hand, just going nice and steady. So because the bones are obviously already in place in here, I like to use my zipper foot, which just makes sure I can get nice and snug up to the edge of the bones without the foot of the machine kind of rocking kind of all over the place and going wonky, and also helps stop me sewing through the bones as well. Well, this is a good start of what to do bias binding, because as you can see, I have reached a point here where there's 2 strips of bias binding joined together, and that it's inevitable. I do try and use as longer lengths of bias binding as I can, but when you're doing really long lengths, it's inevitable you're going to have to put joins in it somewhere. And you can guarantee that that join is going to position itself perfectly where you need to go around a curve, which is exactly what's happened here. So this is a great start to sewing bias binding on today. So I'm just going to have to very carefully stitch this in as I go around. As you can see, I'm just clipping into the seam allowance of the bias binding just to help ease it round these curves. I've just discovered that you can sew through synthetic whalebone. Amazingly, I've not broken the needle, but yeah, that's not ideal. I didn't want to do that. This is going well. So that is the bias all stitched on the inside of the top edge of the stays. All the way up there. And all the way down to the other edge. So what I'm going to do now Yeah, so you can probably see some of these edges are just a little bit messy, and I also need to just trim some of these down so that the bias can just nicely fold over without buckling the edge. You want to basically, you want the bias to encase the edge. You don't want to fold or create bulk underneath that bias if you can help it. You want to try and keep it as nice and flat as possible. So yeah, so what I tend to do is just go around and just trim this edge down, just tidy it up, and just to make sure there's no kind of bulky bits sticking up too high. Okay, so I'm now ready to sew the bias down on the right sides. You can see if I fold it over roughly how it's going to look, and you want to be able to fold it over so that you can't really see that stitching line. So I may just have to go back and just trim that curve in a little bit more. But what you'll find is because the bias binding is obviously on the bias, it has that little bit of stretch, so you can just ease it around the curves quite nicely. Now I know when I come to do the tabs on the bottom, the curves and the angles are a lot tighter and sharper, so it'll just need a little bit more wiggling and a little bit more persuasion, but on these kind of gentler curves you can just see how nicely that will just sit around those. So to start off the bias binding, as I said earlier, I leave about 2 centimeters extra, which I will then fold around to create a nice finished edge on here. And what I do is I fold it over, then I normally get my scissors, flop out, and I normally just snip in just a little triangle just on the bias binding. So once I've cut the little triangle in, you can see that I can just swing that up a little bit and swing the top piece down, and so it just tucks in like that. So it's not sliding because it's not very slidey fabric. So yeah, so I pinch it in just slightly like that. Fold that top edge over, and I'll just secure it with a pin. Just make sure it doesn't move, and so you can see more clearly. Like so. And then what I also do, which you'll see later on, but I just hand finish this edge to stop it either coming out with wear and tear, and also so that this point just gets squished down a little bit, so it's not got that pointy up angle on it, because it's a bias, it tends to stretch a little bit and want to curve up. So yeah, so what I normally do is just anchor it down with some stitches, which just keeps that nice and secure. But now that is ready for me to run this through my machine. And what I want to do, again, I'll be using my zipper foot so I can get nice and snug up to the edge of the boning and not go through the boning this time like I did earlier. And I'll be stitching right on this very edge just to give it a nice neat finish. You know, it doesn't matter if I overrun the edge on the inside, because on the inside no one's going to see it too much. But so ideally it will be nice and neat and not too wobbly, but it's the front that we want to get nice and neat. So I have, as you can see, finally got the binding on one side of the bottom edge. Oh my goodness, that took some effort. Oh, my camera battery's going to die. I'm going to have to plug you in, so I'm hoping I can quickly just record this before I go have a break, because I need a break. Yeah, that was fiddly. That was definitely fiddly. I have managed to sew it on by machine. It took me a couple of attempts to get it started. And I did have to go and have a quick Google on YouTube, a look on YouTube, and I found Red Fredhead's little video, shows you how machine sewing the bias onto the stays, and that was really handy because that just suddenly clicked into place that what I wasn't quite doing right, and yeah, so it's really just a case of easing around all these curves and even these kind of the points at the waist where it's very tight. Again, it's just easing, kind of curving around that as well. So now I need to kind of obviously tidy all this up, trim all the kind of the excess off, and make sure I can fold the bias kind of over nicely the other way. But yeah, I'm going to go for a break and have a cup of tea before I tackle that. So I shall be back shortly. Okay, so I'm currently steaming and pressing the binding around to the other side, and this is such a fiddly job. I now understand why people have such issues with binding stays, because it really is a bit of a pig. Once you kind of get the knack of it, it's looking quite nice. I'm quite pleased with this. Obviously these two bits have already steamed. Yeah, there is a bit of a knack to getting it around this curve, but you can. The beauty of the bias is because it's got that stretch in it, is you can pull it and it kind of does sort of want to sit in that curved shape, which is really nice. And then I just give it a proper steam and it just sets it in place, which is awesome, because that means hopefully I won't need to anchor it with too many pins before I try and put it through the sewing machine. So yeah, it's going to take me a while. I'm just kind of working my way around each of these tabs. Hopefully you'll be able to see here when I kind of pull that tight. You've got the pressed over edge of the bias there, and when you just gently apply a bit of force, it will just sit around that curve. So I need to steam up this side of this tab. I don't want to use too much steam because obviously it's plastic boning in the stays, but in theory it should be able to take a little bit of heat. And obviously the bias binding is made out of silk dupion, and that just presses beautifully. I do love working with silk dupion. And does anybody else love that wonderful smoky smell you get when you steam dupion as well? Just makes me think of India, and yeah, I just I just imagine that's what the like the silk weaving areas of India must smell like. So yeah, you see a bit of finger pressing just to persuade it, and then we can just gentle pop of steam just to set it in place. But yeah, this is taking a bit more time than I thought it would, but obviously if you can sew it by machine, it is obviously quicker than sewing it by hand, but you've still got to go slow and steady and take your time. It's still not a quick job by any means. Well, at least I started these in August. It might be Halloween at this rate by the time I get this done.